The winter of 1453 descended upon Ashford Manor like a curse spoken in whispers. Snow buried the cobblestone paths beneath blankets of white, and the wind howled through the corridors like the ghost of some forgotten grief. Lady Eleanora Blackwood stood at the frosted window of her chamber, watching the storm devour the world beyond the glass. Her breath formed small clouds that faded as quickly as they appeared, leaving no trace, much like hope itself in these desperate times. Her father had been dead for 4 months. The consumption had taken him slowly, mercilessly, stealing first his strength, then his voice, and finally his life. He had died holding her hand, whispering apologies for the debts he could not pay, for the ruin he was leaving behind. And ruin it was. The servants had fled one by one, seeking employment in households that could still afford to pay wages. The horses had been sold, the silver had been pawned. Even her mother's jewelry, the emerald pendant that had been passed down through 5 generations, now resided in some merchant's strongbox, exchanged for enough coin to survive another month. Now only Eleanora remained, along with old Agnes, the cook who had served the Blackwood family since before Eleanora was born. Together they maintained the skeleton of a household, heating only the kitchen and Eleanora's small chamber, rationing the dwindling stores of grain and salted meat. Lord Roderick Ashworth, her father's creditor, had already sent 3 letters demanding payment. The 4th, which had arrived yesterday, contained an ultimatum: pay the debt in full by the Feast of Candlemas, or forfeit the manor and all its lands. There was, of course, another option. Lord Ashworth had made it abundantly clear in his letters that he would be willing to forgive the debt entirely, in exchange for Eleanora's hand in marriage. She would sooner throw herself from the tower. Ashworth was 50 years old, 3 times widowed, and possessed of a cruelty that was whispered about in every village within 100 miles. His first wife had died in a fall down the stairs. His second had succumbed to a mysterious illness. His third had simply vanished one winter night, never to be seen again. Eleanora had no intention of becoming the 4th. But what choice did she have? She was 20 years old, alone, with no family to protect her and no resources to fight back. The world of 1453 was not kind to women without protectors, and the law offered no shield against a man of Ashworth's wealth and influence. The sound of pounding at the manor door startled her from her dark thoughts. She descended the winding stairs cautiously, her hand trailing along the cold stone wall. Agnes was already at the entrance, peering through the small iron grate with suspicion etched into every line of her weathered face.
"Who would be mad enough to travel in such a storm?" the old woman muttered. Eleanora moved to the grate and looked out into the swirling snow. A single figure stood before the door, so covered in white that he seemed almost part of the storm itself. His cloak was ragged, his boots worn through, and he shivered with a violence that suggested he had been walking for hours through the brutal cold.
When he raised his face toward the grate, Eleanora saw features sharp with hunger and exhaustion. A strong jaw shadowed with stubble, hollow cheeks, and eyes the color of a winter sky just before dawn. Those eyes met hers through the iron bars, and something shifted in Eleanora's chest, something she could not name. "Please," the stranger said, his voice hoarse from cold. "I seek only shelter from the storm. I can work. I have served in great households. I know the duties of a manservant. I ask only warmth and perhaps a crust of bread. Nothing more." Agnes snorted. "We've no need of servants we cannot pay. Move along, beggar." "Wait." Eleanora studied the stranger's face, searching for signs of deception or danger. She found only desperation, the same desperation she saw in her own reflection each morning. "You say you have experience in service?" "Yes, my lady." Something flickered in those pale eyes, surprise, perhaps, or hope. "I served in the household of Lord Pemberton for 3 years before his death. Before that, I worked in the kitchens of Thornbury Castle." Thornbury Castle. Agnes's eyebrows rose. "That's the Duke of Thornbury's seat, a grand household indeed." "It was, yes." The stranger's expression clouded briefly. "But the Duke died 2 winters past, and his household was disbanded. I have been seeking employment since." Eleanora considered. A man who had served in a ducal household would possess skills far beyond what their diminished circumstances required. He would know the proper protocols, the correct methods of service, the thousand small details that distinguished a well-run manor from chaos. And he asked only for shelter and food. No wages, at least not until they could afford to pay. It was a gift she could not afford to refuse. "What is your name?" she asked. "William, my lady. William Gray." A common name. Unremarkable. Forgettable. "Very well, William Gray." Eleanora nodded to Agnes, who began the laborious process of unbarring the heavy door. "You shall have your shelter and your chance to prove your worth. But know this, Ashford Manor may appear abandoned, but I am still its lady. Any betrayal of my trust will be met with swift consequences." The stranger bowed his head in a gesture of humble gratitude. "I understand, my lady. You will have no cause to regret your kindness." As he stepped across the threshold, trailing snow and cold air, Eleanora felt that strange flutter in her chest again. There was something about this man, something that did not quite fit the image of a wandering servant seeking work. His bearing was too straight, his voice too refined, his gaze too direct. But she dismissed the thought as quickly as it arose. She was seeing mysteries where there were none, imagining nobility in a man who was clearly nothing more than what he claimed, a servant fallen on hard times, seeking honest employment. What else could he possibly be? The first week of William Gray's service transformed Ashford Manor. He rose before dawn each day, coaxing flames to life in hearths that had stood cold for months. He repaired the broken shutters that had let in the winter wind, patched the holes in the stable roof, and somehow restored order to the chaos that had accumulated since the servant's departure. The manor, which had felt like a tomb awaiting its final occupant, began to breathe again. But it was not his labor that captured Eleanora's attention. It was the way he performed it. William moved through the manor with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they were voiced. When Eleanora entered the library, she found a fire already blazing in the hearth and a cup of warm cider waiting on the reading table. When she mentioned casually that the garden gate had been sticking, she woke the next morning to find it moving smoothly on freshly oiled hinges. When she struggled to reach a book on a high shelf, he appeared at her elbow as if summoned by thought alone, retrieving the volume and presenting it to her with a bow. He was, in short, the perfect servant. Too perfect. Eleanora found herself watching him when he thought she wasn't looking, studying the small details that seemed inconsistent with his claimed station. His hands, though calloused from work, were not the rough, scarred hands of a man who had labored since childhood. His speech, though properly deferential, occasionally slipped into patterns more suited to a nobleman than a serving man. And his eyes, those pale gray eyes that sometimes seemed to see straight through her, held a depth of intelligence and experience that no kitchen boy turned footman should possess. "You are staring again, my lady." His voice startled her from her observations. They were in the great hall, where William was repairing a tapestry that had begun to unravel from its hangings. He had not looked up from his work, yet somehow he had known her eyes were upon him. "I was merely admiring your skill with a needle," Eleanora said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "It is not a talent I would expect in a manservant. I learned many skills during my years of service." William's fingers continued their precise work, threading the needle through ancient fabric with surprising delicacy. A good servant must be versatile. Indeed. Eleanora moved closer, watching the pattern emerge beneath his hands. "Tell me of your time at Thornbury Castle. What was the Duke like?" William's hands paused for just a moment, so briefly that Eleanora might have imagined it. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "He was a good man, just and fair in his dealings, beloved by his household. His death was a great loss. They say he was murdered." Eleanora watched his face carefully. "Poisoned by rivals who coveted his lands." "That is what they say." William resumed his work, his expression revealing nothing. "I would not know the truth of it. I was merely a kitchen servant at the time." "Of course." But something in his tone suggested otherwise. something that spoke of knowledge held close, of secrets guarded behind the mask of servitude. Eleonora should have pressed further. She should have demanded answers, should have insisted on knowing the truth of who this stranger really was. Instead, she found herself asking, "Would you teach me?" William looked up, surprise breaking through his composed expression. "Teach you, my lady? The needlework. I never learned properly. My mother died when I was young, and my father saw no need for such feminine accomplishments." Eleonora felt foolish even as she spoke the words. A lady did not ask a servant to teach her anything. The very suggestion violated every principle of the social order she had been raised to uphold. But William simply nodded, as if noble ladies asking servants for instruction was the most natural thing in the world. "It would be my honor, my lady. If you would sit beside me, I can show you the basic stitches." She sat, their shoulders nearly touched. And as his rough, gentle hands guided hers through the first clumsy attempts at embroidery, Eleonora felt something shift within her, something dangerous and wonderful and completely inappropriate. She was developing feelings for her servant. The realization should have horrified her. It should have sent her fleeing from the room, determined to maintain proper distance between herself and this common man who had no right to occupy her thoughts. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and winter air that clung to his clothes, watching the way the firelight played across his features and turned his gray eyes to silver. God help her. She was falling in love with William Gray. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like Eleonora's, tales of forbidden love, hidden identities, and courage in the darkest of times arrive here every week. If you want to discover who William Gray truly is, and whether love can bridge the impossible gulf between a lady and her servant, subscribe now and join us on this journey. Don't let her story pass you by. The weeks that followed were an exquisite torture. Eleonora found herself inventing reasons to be near William, lingering in the great hall while he worked, requesting his assistance with tasks she could easily have performed alone, extending their needlework lessons far beyond what any sensible person would consider necessary. She told herself it was merely loneliness, the natural consequence of months of isolation in a crumbling manor with only an elderly cook for company. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. William, for his part, maintained the perfect demeanor of a devoted servant. He was always present when needed, always absent when not, always addressing her with proper respect and appropriate deference. Yet there were moments, brief, charged moments, when his mask seemed to slip. She caught him watching her once as she read by the fire in the library. His expression before he noticed her attention and smoothed it away had been one of such tender longing that it stole her breath. Another time, when she stumbled on the stairs and he caught her arm to steady her, his hand had lingered on her elbow for just a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. And once, when she woke from a nightmare screaming her father's name, it was William who appeared at her chamber door, not to enter, never that, but to speak through the wood in a voice so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. "I am here, my lady. You are safe. Whatever demons haunt your dreams, they cannot reach you while I stand guard." She had pressed her hand against the door, imagining she could feel the warmth of him on the other side, and whispered words she would never have dared speak in daylight. "Thank you, William. I do not know what I would do without you." The silence that followed had been heavy with unspoken things. When he finally responded, his voice was rough with emotion he could not entirely conceal. "You would survive, my lady. You are stronger than you know, but I am grateful beyond measure that you need not prove it alone." These moments accumulated like snowflakes, each one insignificant on its own, but together forming something substantial, something undeniable. Eleonora knew she should dismiss William, should send him away before the feelings growing between them could blossom into something that would destroy them both. A lady who formed an attachment to a servant was ruined beyond redemption. Society would cast her out, the church would condemn her, even the law would offer no protection if she gave her heart to a man so far beneath her station. But she could not do it. She could not send him away. And so she did the only thing she could. She buried her feelings deep, locked them away in the most secret chamber of her heart, and pretended that everything was proper and appropriate and exactly as it should be. It was a lie that grew harder to maintain with each passing day. On the first day of February, Lord Roderick Ashworth came to Ashford Manor. He arrived with a retinue of 6 armed men, riding horses whose glossy coats and silver-studded bridles proclaimed wealth that bordered on obscenity. The lord himself was exactly as the rumors described, corpulent and cruel, with small eyes that gleamed with malicious intelligence and thick fingers weighted down by rings of gold. Eleanora received him in the great hall, her spine straight and her expression composed despite the terror clawing at her stomach. William stood near the fireplace, ostensibly tending the flames, but she could feel his attention fixed upon her like a physical presence at her back. "Lady Eleanora." Ashworth did not bow, an insult so deliberate that even Agnes, watching from the kitchen doorway, gasped audibly. "You have not responded to my final letter." "There was nothing to say, my lord. I cannot pay the debt, as you well know." "Indeed I do." Ashworth smiled, revealing teeth stained brown from years of wine and excess. "Which is why I have come in person to discuss alternative arrangements. If you refer to your proposal of marriage, my answer remains unchanged. I would rather lose everything than become your wife." The words were out before she could stop them. Bold, reckless, the kind of defiance that could have deadly consequences when directed at a man of Ashworth's power. She saw his face darken, saw his thick hands clench at his sides, and braced herself for violence. But Ashworth merely laughed, a sound like gravel scraping over stone. "Spirit, I like spirit in a woman." He stepped closer, near enough that Eleanora could smell the sour wine on his breath. "It makes the breaking so much more satisfying." "You will not touch her." The voice came from behind her, William's voice, but transformed. Gone was the humble deference of a servant. In its place was cold authority, the voice of a man accustomed to command. Ashworth's eyes narrowed as he looked past Eleanora to the figure by the fireplace. "And who are you to give orders, servant?" "No one of consequence, my lord." William's voice had returned to its normal register, but something dangerous still lurked beneath the surface. "Merely a man concerned for his lady's welfare." "Your lady's welfare is none of your concern." Ashworth turned back to Eleanora, dismissing William from his attention. "You have until the feast of St. Valentine. Present yourself at Ashworth Hall on that night, prepared to become my bride, or I will have this manor razed to the ground and you thrown into the streets. Do you understand?" Eleanora met his gaze without flinching. "I understand perfectly, my lord." "Good." Ashworth turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. "And dismiss that servant. He looks at you with ideas above his station. I won't have a man with such presumption near my future wife." He was gone before Eleanora could respond, his retinue following like shadows. The sound of hoofbeats gradually faded into the winter silence, leaving behind an absence that felt almost peaceful by comparison. "My lady." William was at her side before she realized she was trembling. "You should sit. You've gone very pale." She allowed him to guide her to a chair, too shaken to protest the familiarity of his hands on her arms. Only when she was seated, a cup of warm wine pressed into her cold fingers, did she find her voice. "He will do it. He will destroy everything and drag me to his hall regardless of my wishes. He will try." William knelt before her, his gray eyes blazing with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "But he will not succeed. I swear it on my life." "How can you promise such a thing? You are one man against his army. You are—" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "You are just a servant." Something flickered across William's face. Pain, perhaps, or frustration at bonds he could not break. Perhaps. But even a servant can have resources, allies, knowledge that might prove useful against a man like Ashworth. What kind of knowledge? William was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Lord Ashworth's fortune is not what it appears. His wealth is built on foundations of fraud and murder. Debts collected through forged documents, estates seized through fabricated claims, rivals eliminated through poison and blade. He paused, his eyes searching her face. Including, perhaps, your father. The cup slipped from Eleanora's nerveless fingers, spilling wine across the stone floor like blood. My father? The debt he owed Ashworth, the debt that destroyed him. I believe it was manufactured, created through forged documents to justify seizure of your lands and your person. William's hands closed over hers, warm and strong. Your father was an honorable man who was destroyed by a monster, and I have spent years gathering the evidence to prove it. Eleanora stared at him, her mind reeling. How could you possibly know this? How could a kitchen servant from Thornbury Castle know anything about my father's dealings with Lord Ashworth? William hesitated, and she saw the battle play out behind his eyes, the desire to speak warring with some deeper imperative toward silence. I cannot tell you everything, he said finally. Not yet. There are reasons that would put you in even greater danger if I spoke them aloud. But I need you to trust me, Eleanora. I need you to believe that I am on your side, that I will do everything in my power to protect you from Ashworth. It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it on his lips, intimate, tender, completely inappropriate, sent warmth flooding through her body despite the winter chill. I do trust you, she whispered. God help me. I trust you completely. His hands tightened on hers, and for one suspended moment she thought he might kiss her. She saw the desire in his eyes, felt the tension in his body as he leaned almost imperceptibly closer. Then he pulled back, releasing her hands and rising to his feet in a single fluid motion. The mask of the servant had returned, but beneath it, something had fundamentally changed. Then trust me a little longer, my lady. Before Ashworth's deadline arrives, we will find a way to bring him down. I promise you. Eleanora watched him retreat to the fireplace, resuming his duties as if nothing had happened. But she knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that everything had changed. She loved him. Against all logic, against all propriety, against every rule that governed the world she had been born into. She loved William Gray. And somehow, impossibly, she sensed that he loved her too. The days that followed were consumed by preparation. William moved through the manor with new purpose, spending long hours in the library poring over old documents and account books. He sent letters to destinations he refused to name, receiving responses sealed with wax that bore no identifying marks. He wrote out at odd hours, returning with information he shared only in fragments. Ashworth has enemies, he told her one evening as they sat together by the fire. Men he has wronged, families he has destroyed. If we can unite them, present a common front before the king's justice. The king's justice? Eleanora laughed bitterly. The king does not concern himself with the grievances of minor nobles against men of Ashworth's influence. Perhaps not under normal circumstances. William's eyes held a strange light. But if the evidence is damning enough, if enough voices cry out for accountability, even kings must listen. You speak as though you know how kings think. He turned away, but not before she caught a flicker of something in his expression. Guilt, perhaps, or the weight of secrets too heavy to bear. I have observed much in my years of service, he said quietly. One learns to read the powerful, even from a distance. Eleanora studied his profile in the firelight. The strong line of his jaw, the furrow of concentration between his brows, the way his hands moved with unconscious grace as he turned the pages of the ledger before him. Every day her feelings for him deepened. Every day the impossibility of those feelings became more painful. William. He looked up, and she saw her own longing reflected in his gray eyes. May I ask you something? Anything, my lady. She hesitated, knowing that the question she was about to ask would change everything between them. But she could no longer bear the uncertainty, the constant wondering, the torment of loving a man she was not even sure she truly knew. Who are you really? The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. William's face had gone very still, his expression unreadable. "I am William Gray," he said finally, "a servant seeking honest employment. That is what you are. I asked who you are." Something cracked in his composure, a fracture in the mask he had worn so carefully since the night he arrived at her door. "I am a man who has lost everything he loved," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A man who has spent years in hiding, plotting revenge against those who destroyed him. A man who came to this manor seeking information about Lord Ashworth, and found instead—" He stopped, his hands clenching at his sides. "Found what?" Eleanora whispered. "Found you." The words seemed torn from him against his will. "Found a woman of such courage and grace that I forgot why I came. Found a heart so pure that it made me ashamed of the darkness in my own. Found—" He drew a shuddering breath. "Found love, where I thought myself incapable of ever loving again." Eleanora's heart stopped. The word hung between them, dangerous and precious as a flame in dry timber. "You love me?" "More than my own life." William rose, moving toward her with the careful steps of a man approaching something sacred. "I have tried to fight it. I have reminded myself every day that I have no right to feel this way, that the gulf between us is too vast to bridge. But I cannot stop. I cannot look at you without wanting to protect you, to cherish you, to spend every remaining day of my existence making you happy." Tears were streaming down Eleanora's face, but she made no move to wipe them away. "Then why do you not tell me the truth? Why do you hide behind this mask of servitude when we both know you are so much more?" "Because the truth would put you in danger." William stopped before her, close enough to touch, yet holding himself apart with visible effort. "Because there are men who would kill to learn what I know, and being near me makes you a target. Because I am not worthy of you. Not yet. Not until I have finished what I came to do." "What did you come to do?" "To destroy Lord Ashworth." His voice hardened with cold fury. "To expose his crimes, strip away his power, and watch him face the justice he has escaped for far too long." "Why? What did he do to you?" William was silent for so long that Eleanora thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "He murdered my family, my father, my mother, my sister, all of them dead by his hand or his order. I was 17 years old when I came home to find our manor burning, their bodies left in the ashes like refuse." The horror of it stole Eleanora's breath. "William, I escaped only because I was away that night, visiting a friend in a neighboring village. When I returned and found what he had done, I wanted to die. I wanted to ride to Ashworth Hall and challenge him directly to take as many of his men with me as I could before they cut me down. But you didn't." "No. An old friend of my father's found me before I could act on my rage. He convinced me that a direct assault would only result in my death and Ashworth's continued impunity. He helped me disappear, gave me a new identity, trained me in the skills I would need to bring down a man of Ashworth's wealth and influence." "So William Gray is not your real name?" "No." He met her eyes, and she saw the weight of years of deception in his gaze. "But it is the only name I can give you, at least not until Ashworth is defeated, and it is safe to be who I truly am." Eleanora reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingertips. "I do not care what name you bear. I do not care if you are a lord or a peasant, a prince or a servant. I love you, William, or whoever you truly are. I love you." The last of his resistance crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that spoke of years of loneliness, of grief too long suppressed, of love found where he had least expected it. "Eleanora," her name was a prayer on his lips. "My brave, beautiful, impossible Eleanora, I do not deserve you. Perhaps not." She smiled through her tears. "But you have me nonetheless." He kissed her then, not the gentle, tentative kiss of courtship, but a kiss of passion and promise, of souls recognizing each other across the barriers of circumstance and station. Eleanora surrendered to it completely, letting the fire of his touch burn away the last of her doubts. She did not know his true name. She did not know his true history. She knew only that she loved him, and that he loved her, and that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way to be together. Whatever the future held, she would face it at his side. If this story is stirring something deep within your heart, if you feel the love between Eleanora and William, the hope against impossible odds, then leave a comment now. Write these words: "Love knows no station." Because that is what this story teaches us. That true love sees beyond titles and positions, beyond wealth and poverty, beyond all the artificial barriers we build between ourselves and happiness. Leave your comment and let us know that you believe. The feast of St. Valentine approached like an executioner sharpening his blade. Eleanora and William worked through the days with desperate intensity, gathering evidence, sending messages to potential allies, preparing for the confrontation they knew was coming. But the nights they stole for themselves, sharing whispered conversations and tender embraces in the shadows of the crumbling manor. "Tell me about your family," Eleanora asked one evening, curled beside him before the fire. "The family you lost." William was silent for a moment, his eyes distant with memory. "My father was a good man, honorable, generous to his tenants, beloved by all who knew him. My mother was the gentlest soul I have ever encountered. She could calm a frightened horse with a word, soothe a crying child with a touch. And my sister—" His voice cracked, and Eleanora took his hand in hers. "My sister was 12 years old. She had just begun to learn the lute, and she practiced for hours every day, determined to master every song she heard. The last time I saw her, she played a piece she had composed herself, a simple melody, full of the joy and innocence of childhood." He drew a shuddering breath. "I hear that melody in my dreams sometimes, and then I wake and remember that I will never hear it again. I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate, but she had no others to offer. "Ashworth took everything from me. My family, my home, my name, my future." William turned to face her, and in his gray eyes, she saw a fury that burned cold as winter ice. "But he will not take you. Whatever I must sacrifice, whatever price I must pay, I will not allow him to claim you. We will defeat him together. No," his voice was sharp. "When the time comes, you must stay here. Stay hidden. Stay safe. Let me handle Ashworth alone." "I will not. Eleanora." He gripped her shoulders, his gaze intense. "If anything happened to you because of me, I could not bear it. I have already lost everyone I loved. I cannot lose you too." "And you think I could bear losing you?" She pulled away, anger rising to match his fear. "You are not the only one who has suffered, William. You are not the only one who has watched helpless as everything you loved was destroyed. I have spent months in this crumbling prison, waiting for Ashworth to come and finish what he started. I will not wait any longer. I will not hide while you risk your life alone." They stared at each other, two wounded souls fighting their way through pain toward something neither had expected to find. Finally, William's expression softened. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met." A necessary quality when dealing with stubborn men. He laughed, a sound of genuine surprise and delight that transformed his features, making him look younger than his years. "Very well. We face Ashworth together. But you must promise me, if things go wrong, if the situation becomes too dangerous, you will flee. Save yourself, even if it means leaving me behind." "I will make no such promise." "Eleanora." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her love and determination into the touch of her lips. When she finally pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire and something deeper, something eternal. "We face this together," she repeated. "Win or lose, live or die, together." "Together," he agreed, the word of vow more binding than any spoken before an altar. 3 days before the feast of St. Valentine, an unexpected visitor arrived at Ashford Manor. She was an old woman, bent with age but possessed of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She came alone, on foot, wrapped in a cloak of deep green wool that had seen better days. When Agnes opened the door to her knock, she asked for William Gray by name. Eleanora watched from the stairs as William emerged from the library, his face shifting through surprise, recognition, and something that looked almost like relief. "Margaret." He crossed to the old woman, taking her gnarled hands in his with a tenderness that spoke of long acquaintance. "I did not expect you to come in person. Some messages cannot be trusted to paper, young master." The old woman's voice was rough but warm. "And some news demands to be delivered face to face." "News? What news?" Margaret's eyes flickered to Eleanora, still standing on the stairs, and back to William. "Perhaps we should speak privately." "No." William glanced up at Eleanora, his expression open. "Whatever you have to say, she can hear. I have no secrets from her." The old woman's eyebrows rose. "Indeed. Things have changed since last we spoke." "Everything has changed." William's voice softened as he looked at Eleanora. "Please, Margaret, tell us what you've learned." The old woman settled into a chair by the fire, accepting the cup of warm cider that Agnes pressed into her hands. Only when she had taken a long, grateful sip did she speak. "Ashworth is moving faster than we anticipated. He has called in favors, gathered allies, prepared a force that far exceeds what we expected. He means to take this manor by force on the feast of St. Valentine, regardless of whether the lady accepts his proposal." Eleanora felt her blood run cold. "He would take me against my will? He would take everything, my lady. Your lands, your person, your life if it suited him." Margaret's gaze was sorrowful. "The man has grown bolder in recent months. He believes himself untouchable, beyond the reach of any justice. He is wrong." William's voice was steel.
"The evidence we have gathered is not yet enough." Margaret shook her head. "I have spoken with our allies, examined every document we possess. We can prove wrongdoing, yes, enough to sow doubt, to raise questions, but not enough to bring formal charges before the king's court. Ashworth's lawyers are clever, and he has judges in his pocket. Without irrefutable evidence of treason or murder, we cannot touch him." The silence that followed was heavy with despair.
"There must be something," Eleanora said. "Some weakness we can exploit, some leverage we can use." Margaret studied her for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "There is one possibility, a slim chance, but perhaps our only one." "Tell us." "Ashworth keeps a ledger. A private record of all his dealings, the bribes paid, the murders ordered, the documents forged. It is said to contain evidence enough to condemn a dozen men, including several close to the king himself." "Where is this ledger?" William demanded. "In his private chambers at Ashworth Hall. He trusts no one with it, keeps it locked in a strong box beside his bed." Margaret's eyes were grave. "If we could obtain that ledger, we would have everything we need to destroy him. Then we must steal it." "William, no." Eleanora grabbed his arm. "Ashworth Hall is a fortress. You cannot simply walk in and take what you want." "I don't intend to walk in." William's jaw was set, his eyes blazing with purpose. "The feast of St. Valentine is in 3 days. Ashworth expects you to present yourself at his hall that night. He will be distracted, his attention focused on his triumph. While he waits for you, I will find another way in. And if you're caught, then I die having tried." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Eleanora, this is our only chance. If Ashworth takes you, if he seizes your lands, there will be no recourse. We must act now while we still have the element of surprise." Eleanora wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, any other way. But looking into his eyes, she saw the truth she had been avoiding. There was no other way. "Very well," she said finally. "But I am coming with you." Absolutely not. You said we face this together, win or lose, live or die. She held his gaze, daring him to contradict his own words. Did you mean it, or were they just pretty sounds? William stared at her, frustration and admiration warring on his face. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. Together, then. God help us both. The feast of St. Valentine dawned gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened snow. Eleanora dressed with care, choosing her mother's finest gown, deep blue velvet trimmed with silver, the last piece of finery that had not been sold or pawned. If she was walking into the wolf's den, she would do so with dignity. William waited for her in the great hall, dressed not in servant's attire but in the clothes Margaret had brought, a dark doublet and hose of good quality, a cloak lined with fur. He looked, Eleanora realized with a start, like a nobleman. The transformation was remarkable, yet somehow not surprising. He had always carried himself like a man of rank, even when scrubbing floors and polishing silver. "You look beautiful," he said softly as she descended the stairs. "You look different." She reached up to adjust the clasp of his cloak. "More like yourself, perhaps." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or longing for a life he had lost. "Perhaps. After tonight, if we survive, I will tell you everything, I promise. After tonight." She kissed him lightly on the lips. "Hold to that promise." They rode through the winter twilight, following little-used paths that wound through forest and field toward Ashworth Hall. Margaret had provided detailed maps, showing a servant's entrance that was lightly guarded during feast days, when most of the household was occupied with celebration. Ashworth Hall loomed before them as darkness fell, a massive stone fortress bristling with towers and battlements. Torchlight blazed from 100 windows, and the sound of music and laughter drifted on the cold air. The feast was already underway. "The servants' entrance is there." William pointed to a small door set into the outer wall, nearly hidden by shadows. "I'll go first. Wait here until I signal. Be careful. Always." He kissed her once more, quickly, then slipped away into the darkness. Eleanora waited, counting her heartbeats, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. Minutes stretched like hours. She imagined every possible disaster. William discovered, William captured, William bleeding out in some dark corridor while she waited helpless and unknowing. Then a light flickered 3 times in the window above the servant's door. The signal. She moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, her heart pounding against her ribs. The door was unlocked. She slipped inside, finding herself in a narrow corridor lit by a single guttering torch. William was waiting at the end of the hall, his face tense but triumphant. "This way. Ashworth's chambers are in the West Tower." They crept through the castle, avoiding the main corridors where servants hurried back and forth with platters of food and flagons of wine. The sounds of the feast grew louder as they ascended, then faded as they turned into a deserted wing of the fortress. "Here." William stopped before a heavy oak door, reinforced with iron bands. "This is it." He produced a ring of keys, stolen, Eleanora assumed, from some hapless servant, and began trying them one by one. The third key turned smoothly in the lock. The chamber beyond was opulent, almost obscenely so. Tapestries of silk and gold covered the walls. Rugs from distant lands cushioned the floor. A massive bed dominated the center of the room, draped in crimson velvet. And there, beside the bed, sat a small iron strongbox. William crossed to it immediately, kneeling to examine the lock. "It's complex. This will take time." "How much time?" "I don't know." His voice was tight with concentration. "Keep watch at the door. If anyone comes, I'll warn you." Eleanora stood at the entrance, her ears straining for any sound of approach. The distant music of the feast seemed to mock her. Revelry and celebration while she and William risked their lives for evidence that might not even exist. Minutes crawled by. She heard William's tools scraping against metal, heard his muttered curses as each attempt failed, Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. Then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs toward Ashworth's chambers. "William!" He looked up, saw her expression, and moved with desperate speed. One final twist of his tools, a click of the lock releasing, and the strong box swung open. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, thick with years of accumulated secrets. "I have it." William grabbed the book, stuffing it inside his doublet. "We need to go, now." But it was too late. The door burst open, and Lord Ashworth stood in the entrance, his face twisted with fury. Behind him stood 4 armed guards, their swords already drawn. "Well, well." Ashworth's smile was a predator's grin. "The lady and her servant come to steal from me. How convenient. I had planned to take you tonight anyway, Lady Eleonora. Now I can add theft to your crimes. The only criminal here is you." William stepped in front of Eleonora, placing himself between her and danger. "Your ledger contains evidence of murder, fraud, and treason. When it reaches the king, it will reach no one." Ashworth drew his sword, a massive blade that gleamed in the torchlight. "You are trespassers, caught red-handed in my private chambers. The law allows me to execute you on the spot. Then you will have to go through me first." William drew his own blade, a slender sword, elegant rather than powerful. Against Ashworth's weapon, it seemed almost pathetic, but he held it with the confidence of a man who knew how to use it. "A servant challenging his better?" Ashworth laughed. "This grows more amusing by the moment. Very well. I'll enjoy killing you slowly." He lunged. What followed was unlike anything Eleonora had ever witnessed. William moved with a speed and grace that seemed impossible, his blade dancing through patterns that spoke of years of training under the finest masters. Ashworth was strong, brutal, relentless, but William was faster, more precise, every motion calculated to maximum effect. The guards tried to intervene, but the narrow corridor limited their movements. Eleonora grabbed a candlestick from a nearby table and struck one across the face. He went down screaming, and she felt a savage satisfaction that surprised her. "Eleonora, run!" William shouted, parrying a vicious blow that would have taken his head. "Get the ledger to Margaret. She knows what to do." "I won't leave you. You must." He ducked under another swing, his counter-strike opening a gash on Ashworth's arm. "The evidence is more important than either of us. If we both die here, everything is lost." She hesitated, torn between love and logic. Every instinct screamed at her to stay, to fight beside him, to live or die at his side as she had promised. But he was right. If they both fell here, Ashworth would win. The ledger would be destroyed, the evidence lost, and countless future victims would suffer because she couldn't bear to leave the man she loved. "I'll come back for you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I swear it." "I know." His eyes met hers for one eternal moment. "I love you, Eleonora. Whatever happens, remember that." Then she was running, down the stairs, through the corridors, past the startled servants and oblivious guests. She burst through the servants' entrance into the cold night air, her lungs burning, the ledger pressed against her chest. Behind her, she heard the sounds of fighting gradually fade into silence. 3 days later, Margaret arrived at Ashford Manor with news that made Eleonora's heart stop. "He lives." The words seemed to echo in the empty hall, too precious to be real. "William?" Eleonora gasped. "He survived?" "Barely." Margaret's expression was grave. "He was wounded in the fight, captured when he could no longer lift his sword. Ashworth intended to execute him publicly as an example to others who might challenge his authority." "Intended? What stopped him?" "You did, my lady." Margaret reached into her cloak and produced a rolled parchment, sealed with the royal signet. "The ledger you brought me contained evidence far more damning than we had dared hope. Not merely fraud and murder, but detailed accounts of a plot against the crown itself, letters between Ashworth and foreign enemies, payments received in exchange for military secrets, plans for an uprising that would have plunged the kingdom into war." Eleanora stared at the parchment, hardly daring to believe. The king has ordered Lord Ashworth's immediate arrest on charges of high treason. His lands are forfeit, his titles stripped, his life in the hands of royal justice. Margaret smiled, and there was grim satisfaction in the expression. The man who destroyed so many families will finally face the consequences of his crimes. Relief flooded through Eleanora, so intense that she had to grip the back of a chair to stay upright. And William? Where is he now? On his way here, under royal escort. Margaret's smile faded, replaced by something more complicated. But there is something you should know, my lady. Something about the man you love that will change everything. I don't care about his past. Whatever he's done, whoever he was before, it is not his past that will change things. Margaret moved to the window, gazing out at the winter landscape. It is his future, and yours. Before Eleanora could demand an explanation, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the courtyard below. She rushed to the window, her heart pounding, and saw a company of riders approaching, knights in gleaming armor, flying banners of crimson and gold. Royal banners. And at their center, mounted on a white horse despite the bandages visible beneath his cloak, rode William. But he was transformed. Gone was the rough clothing of a servant. In its place, he wore garments of obvious quality and expense. A chain of gold hung around his neck, bearing a pendant she could not quite make out from this distance. And the men around him, the royal knights, treated him not with the casual contempt shown to commoners, but with the deference due to a man of rank. Eleanora flew down the stairs, barely aware of her feet touching the stone. She burst through the front door into the cold air just as William dismounted, grimacing at the pain of his wounds. William! He turned, and the smile that spread across his face made her heart soar. Eleanora! She ran to him, throwing herself into his arms despite the impropriety, despite the watching knights, despite everything. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, murmuring words of love and relief and gratitude. I thought I had lost you, she whispered. When I left you behind, you did exactly what you should have done. He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes shining. The ledger you saved has brought down a monster. Because of your courage, hundreds of families will finally receive justice. I don't care about justice. She touched his face, tracing the new scar that ran along his jaw. I only care about you. Then there is something I must tell you. William's expression grew serious. Something I should have told you long ago, but could not. Not while Ashworth still held power, not while the danger was so great. Whatever it is, my name is not William Gray. He took her hands in his, holding them as though they were precious beyond measure. My true name is William Edward Thornbury. I am the Duke of Thornbury, the last surviving member of the family that Lord Ashworth murdered 17 years ago. The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanora's feet. Duke? The title was taken from me when Ashworth forged evidence of my family's treason, claiming our lands and leaving me for dead. I survived only because I was away the night of the attack, and loyal servants helped me escape before Ashworth's men could find me. His grip on her hands tightened. I have spent 17 years in hiding, building the evidence to reclaim my birthright and bring my family's murderer to justice. And now, thanks to you, I have finally succeeded. Eleanora stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the humble servant who had appeared at her door with the nobleman who stood before her now. You're a duke, a real duke. Yes. Something flickered in his eyes, fear, perhaps, or uncertainty. Does that change things between us? Change things? She laughed, a sound halfway between joy and hysteria. All this time I have been torturing myself with guilt for loving a man I believed to be beneath my station. I have lain awake at night, wondering how I could possibly build a life with a servant, how I could face society's condemnation, how I could... And now? And now I learn that I was falling in love with a duke. She shook her head in wonder. The man I thought impossible to have was in fact the most eligible bachelor in the kingdom. Not the most eligible. William drew her closer, his eyes warm with love. That title belongs to whoever claims the heart of the most remarkable woman in England. And since that woman has already given her heart to me— Presumptuous, she murmured, but she was smiling. Perhaps. He bent his head, his lips hovering over hers. But accurate. He kissed her then, there in the courtyard of Ashford Manor, surrounded by knights and servants and the winter wind. And Eleanora kissed him back, pouring all her love and relief and joy into the embrace. She had fallen in love with a servant, only to discover he was a duke. It was a fairy tale, a story too improbable to be believed. Yet here she stood, living it. Your Grace. One of the knights cleared his throat apologetically. The king has requested your presence at court to formally restore your titles and lands, and he has expressed a particular interest in meeting the lady who helped bring Lord Ashworth to justice. William looked down at Eleanora, his eyes dancing with mischief. What do you say, my lady? Will you accompany me to court? As what? Your servant. She arched an eyebrow. It seems only fair, given how long you served as mine. I was thinking perhaps something more permanent. He reached into his doublet and withdrew a ring, a simple band of gold set with a single emerald that caught the winter light like a captured star. I was thinking perhaps as my wife. Eleanora's heart stopped. William, I know it is sudden. I know you have every right to refuse, to demand time to consider, to— Yes. He blinked. Yes? Yes, I will marry you. She laughed at his stunned expression. Did you truly think I would say anything else? I fell in love with William Gray, the servant who appeared at my door in a snowstorm. Learning that he is also William Thornbury, Duke of Thornbury, only makes me love him more. I would follow you anywhere, William, to court, to the ends of the earth, to whatever future awaits us. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. Then let us begin that future now, together. Together, she agreed. Always together. Spring came to Thornbury Castle like a benediction, painting the gardens in shades of pink and white as the cherry trees burst into bloom. Eleanora stood at the window of her chamber— no, their chamber, hers and William's, watching the petals drift across the courtyard like fragments of dreams made visible. 1 year had passed since the winter that had changed everything, and the world she inhabited now was so different from the one she had known that sometimes she had to pinch herself to believe it was real. She was a duchess. She lived in a castle that had been restored to its former glory, surrounded by servants and guards and all the trappings of nobility. She had been presented at court, had curtsied before the king, had taken her place among the highest ranks of English society. But none of that mattered as much as the arms that wrapped around her from behind, the familiar warmth of William's body pressing against hers. You're awake early, he murmured against her hair. Couldn't sleep? I was thinking. Dangerous habit. He kissed the curve of her neck, making her shiver with pleasure. What were you thinking about? About how strange life is. She turned in his arms, looking up at his beloved face. A year ago, I was alone in a crumbling manor, waiting for Lord Ashworth to come and destroy what little I had left. I had no hope, no future, nothing to look forward to but misery and ruin. And now? Now I have everything. She touched his face, tracing the scar along his jaw, a permanent reminder of the night that had nearly taken him from her. A home, a husband, a future I never dared imagine. You have more than that. William's hand moved to her stomach, resting there with gentle reverence. You have a family. Eleanora smiled, feeling the new life growing within her. Their child, the first of many they hope to raise within these walls. Yes, a family. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, the danger and deception, the love that had blossomed against all odds, the courage they had found in each other. It had not been easy. There had been moments when she had despaired, when the obstacles had seemed insurmountable, when giving up had seemed the only rational choice. But she had not given up, and neither had he. Together they had brought down a monster, cleared the names of the innocent, and built a life from the ashes of destruction. Together they had proven that love could triumph over hatred, that justice could prevail over corruption, that even the darkest winter must eventually yield to spring. "What are you thinking now?" William asked, watching her face with the tender attention she had come to treasure. "I'm thinking that fairy tales can come true." She kissed him softly. "I'm thinking that I fell in love with a servant and discovered he was a duke. I'm thinking that the most ordinary things can hide the most extraordinary truths. And I'm thinking," he said, "that I am the luckiest man in England, that I found a woman brave enough to open her door to a stranger in a storm, wise enough to see past disguises to the truth beneath, and loving enough to give her heart to a man who had lost all hope of ever being loved again." They stood together at the window, watching the spring morning unfold around them. Somewhere below, servants prepared the great hall for the feast that would celebrate the anniversary of their marriage. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, the world continued its endless turning, full of new stories waiting to be written. But in this moment, there was only this: two hearts beating as one, a love that had conquered every obstacle, and the promise of a future as bright and endless as the morning sky. If you watched this far, it's because this story touched your heart. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end, so I can get to know you and know who really loves the stories on this channel." If Eleanora and William's journey meant something to you, if their courage inspired you, if their love gave you hope, then please like this video and share it with someone who needs to believe that love conquers all. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. More stories await, tales of courage and redemption, of love found in unexpected places, of ordinary people discovering extraordinary strength within themselves. Until the next story, remember, sometimes the most ordinary stranger hiding in plain sight is actually the love of your life in disguise. Never stop believing in fairy tales.